Hello and welcome.
Hi.
So excited to be in conversation tonight with our own beloved Mayor Pro Tem, Jillian Johnson,
Yay.
and incredible thinker and movement maker over at Empower, Sijal Nasralla.
Yeah.
Welcome. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks to everyone who's tuning in to talk about Mayor. If you'd like to participate in the conversation, just chime in the chat, and we're really excited to hear your thoughts. Jillian and Sijal, I wondered if you would share what resonated with you about the film, beginning with you, Sijal.
I have so many feelings about this movie. I think I was left feeling like I think just like a slight pit in my heart a little bit about the overall impossibility of this task that Musa Hadid was taking on. And also like a little bit of disappointment in him, and I think a little bit of just overall just the way he his approach to governance, his like infatuation with branding, and these kind of things, and like, I do love my politicians that I love. Like, I love Jilly, I love the folks who I definitely take a stance of like having a lot of compassion for leaders. And I found myself very much, I think I was like overall felt impacted by the story. I felt like it was like interesting to see, and like an in-depth look into him, having like known about him, but I've kind of like had my own perceptions of him and lumped him into other categories of Palestinian leadership. But I overall left feeling really complex and disappointment for him in his role, and the task that he was trying to take on. Yeah.
If you could summarize in like just a kernel, what was the impossibility of Mayor Hadid's task?
The totality of occupation and governing under those circumstances. And I think if I were to, he's in many ways like trying to build a functioning municipality in a place that he doesn't fully govern, and he can't really fully reach. And then he's like battling global perceptions of Palestine and Palestinians, as well as negotiating his dignity with colonizers, with countries like Germany and Prince William. So I mean, it's just completely impossible. And at the end of the day, that's like I think where the absurdity really shines in the movie. But yeah, I'll stop there for now.
That was really helpful. Thank you, Sijal. Jillian, what resonated with you?
Yeah, there were a couple of moments in the film where I just found myself like really identifying with Mayor Hadid and just the work that he was trying to do while in dealing with like these day-to-day issues, while also trying to navigate this broader context that that he and his constituents are forced into by powers far beyond their control, and just trying to do basic stuff while you're constantly being challenged on all sides by the reality of living under occupation and not actually having the kind of control or influence or ability to do what you really want to do for your residents and what your residents really need from you. There was a scene where Mayor Hadid was having a conversation with, I think it was the city leaders from Germany. And there was this moment where they said, I think it was either the mayor or one of his people who said, the goal of the municipality, right? The goal of this government is to make life better for our citizens. Like, that's what we want to do. That's what everyone wants to do. But the situation that they're in, it's just, like Sijal said, it's next to impossible for them to make life better for their residents, because their residents are living under this constant violent oppression. And there's very little power that the mayor of Ramallah has to make any difference with that. I was able to spend a summer in Palestine about 15 years ago and got to spend some time in Ramallah, and was trying to place different parts of the city when I was watching the movie, though unfortunately I didn't get to spend a lot of time walking around. But it was really interesting to see just how much things had changed. I think the movie was filmed about 2 years ago, just in that period of time, and just the way in which some things had changed and things had not changed. Like, I remember walking around Ramallah and there being Israeli soldiers, just on corners or on the hill, right? I mean, and it's something that I think people are just accustomed to, right? In that environment, they know that their municipal government is functioning within this broader system, and that there's not a lot that they can do. But the municipality is the closest thing to them. So when they need services, when they need support, they're going to go to the municipality. They're going to go to the mayor. And so I felt like I identified a lot with him, with things that people come to the city of Durham for, which, because of a variety of forces outside of our control, our capitalist economic system, our state and federal governments, that we don't actually have influence or control over. But we're also the closest body to the people, and so we are always trying to figure out ways to make people's lives better, but also within these constraints. There was a moment where he said he was jealous of other cities when he went to visit other cities, by how much power they had. And I was like, yeah, me too. When I go visit cities in European social democracies where everyone has a right to safe, affordable, accessible housing, I just I die of jealousy. But then, but compared to the mayor of Ramallah, I have an incredible amount of power, right, to do work. So I was really struck by that spectrum of what municipal governments are able to do, from under occupation to being able to govern under an economic system that actually respects human beings and human rights, and then everything in between.
And the film kind of began there, where it was like the municipality it's like the space that people depend upon for their most basic life infrastructure. And he kind of jokes about how people want to overthrow governments, but no one wants to overthrow their municipality because they're really counting on their municipality for some very basic things. And that feels especially salient right now in the midst of this pandemic, where it's like we're really counting on our city structures to come through with water and roads and stability, and just a lot of basic infrastructure from the city and county, and wondering whether that kind of that intensity of the importance of the seemingly mundane, whether that resonated with you, Jillian?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just the first scene where they're talking about city branding, and Sijal's like, "This is the worst." Yeah, but I mean, I identified with that. I was like, look at that. These folks are trying to do these simple, mundane, just regular, everyday tasks in the context of this incredibly violent occupation. How do you ever focus on something like city branding or something like sewage cleanup when you know that at any point, an occupying army could come in and do whatever they want to your residents? It reminded me of, I believe it was last year when there were ICE raids happening in North Carolina. And people were calling me and calling other city council members and county commissioners to be like, how can we protect residents from ICE? What can we do? And if federal, law enforcement come into the city of Durham, we can't do anything. They supersede us. They can come in, they can go to an apartment complex and drag people out and arrest them and, take them to jail or kidnap kids off the street, right? There's nothing we can do to stop them as the city. And there's just this feeling of powerlessness. I'm like, if you see something happening, call me and I will go put my body in between the ICE officer and the resident of the city. But that's it. I don't have any more formal power than any other person. So yeah, that very much, resonated with me, just these basic things that you have to do, and like talking about the settlements and how they have as much access to the limited water supply of the West Bank as they want. Leaving, Palestinians to survive on whatever is less. Like, how do you run a city when you don't have the ability to control your basic resources? It's impossible. And yet people are, these folks are doing it every single day. They're struggling through this work and doing the best they can. I think I felt a little bit differently from Sijal about the mayor. I just really felt for him the whole movie, like having to do this job in this context. There's just like, man, I think my job is hard sometimes, but this guy,
yeah,
who would want this? Who would want this job?
Such a backdrop of brutality. Totally. Sijal, you said the thing about him being disappointing and reminding you had come into the film with some perceptions of him as mayor of Ramallah. Did the film humanize him for you, or did you connect with him more, or did you feel even more kind of disappointed? You said he reminded you of some other Palestinian politicians.
Yeah, there's so I think one of the taglines for the movie, and I think just to kind of couch this, I mean, first of all, I want to respond to some of the stuff Jilly said. I was thinking about Jilly, the task of local governance is so much when I was watching this, and with you in mind, knowing that we're gonna have this conversation, and everything you said totally crossed my mind, especially when thinking about the kinds of ways that our community was impacted by ICE over these past several years. To respond to this, I think that, to the question you're asking, Manju, I'm just one of the taglines for the movie, I think, or I saw this somewhere, maybe it was being advertised, was it's about a man who's trying to, govern a city or run a city when he doesn't have a country, or what does it mean to be a mayor when you don't have a country? And, many Palestinians often talk about Palestinian leadership of and with so much remorse and so much pain, because one of the political realities that Palestinians also face, even within the West Bank, even the governed parts of the West Bank that are governed by Palestinians, is that we Palestinians have a regime before we have a country. We have a regime before we have our independence. And in many ways, Palestinians face dual oppressions by the ones who live under occupation, not only by the Israeli apartheid state, but also by the insecurity and force that insecurity wields by the Palestinian leadership. And so and it does show up in the movie somewhat. I think I want to point out a few scenes. After the news was announced that the embassy will be moving to Jerusalem, he was in the room, kind of the situation room that they framed in the movie. And one of the women on his team was like, what if we just put Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine on the Christmas tree? Mm-hmm. And he said, we are not a substitute for the leadership. And he said, and there was a force in the way that he said that felt very characteristic of the ways in which I see a dual a contradiction with many Palestinians in leadership. where they are trying to create a sense of dignity and joy within the environment that they can create, and also respectability, right? Respectability, performing respectability to the global audiences that are seeing Palestinians. You're like, Prince William comes and Prince William sees the epicenter of City Hall, Ramallah, where there's a fountain and fancy restaurants. Prince William did not go to the parts of Ramallah where there isn't a municipality. Prince William did not go to the parts of Ramallah where people are in clashes with settlers all day. Like, Prince William did not see children get shot in the leg. And so there's that contradiction there, but the contradiction was like, defending from Israeli occupation, performing respectability, performing sovereignty, trying to build it in the process of state formation, the process of independence, while at the same time like suppressing righteous resistance from within their own ranks, because they see a strategy for state formation that is, like, sadly, in my opinion, I think many people, perceive this as well, but as within neoliberalism, like that's the method that they're going to be seeking state formation. So I saw him, complex. He was sweet, like he missed kicking the ball, like he doing the doors and stuff. And like, I'm a complex person. I don't want to paint him with one brush, but like, I do see him as still a part of that, like, arm of that regime and that overall neoliberal strategy of state formation that does not want their people to go into full-on revolt, because that's going to be bad. And I saw his concern for that so clearly when the embassy move was happening, that he was worried about uprisings within his locality that would then cause further clashes with the occupation, like the ones that we witnessed in the film.
And I remember in that moment where that person, his staffer who said the thing about the message on the Christmas tree that would have said, Jerusalem is our capital, he also said municipal services first, political messaging second. And I wondered, like, Jillian, what did you think about that, like, walking the tightrope moment?
Yeah, there's a lot of that, I think that we, luckily in Durham, we aren't in a position where we have to choose between municipal services and our political broader strategies, because our city is in a good place. Like, we have the capacity to provide basic services to residents. Though they're not always perfect, they are at least functional, and we can control them. We have powers from the state that allow us to build a sewer system without anyone's permission. Like, I remember, he kept coming back to that, just like basic need. We need a sewer system, and we have to wait for the Israelis to approve us building this like basic thing for our residents. We don't face anything like that. So I just, I feel like that I would be speaking from a lot of privilege, right? Saying that, like, I don't think that you can separate those two things, but that's where, that at least is where we are able to move in Durham, is we're able to have these broader political conversations, which really impact things like municipal services, like a question of whether we should have police officers respond to crisis calls or traffic accidents. Those are questions that will have very concrete impacts on how we provide and run municipal services. But they're also part of this broader political context of thinking about, what is the best way to provide public safety and these bigger, social and political questions. So I really think they go hand in hand. And even, Mayor Hadid isn't going to be able to provide basic services without dealing with the broader political context that he lives in, because he's got to go to a foreign occupier for permission to treat his people's sewage. But I can see why, when you're in that situation, your concerns are going to be very narrow and focused. And honestly, I'd be surprised if they had energy for anything else after that. Like, after just the incredible amount of work that you have to do to just provide basic services to your residents in this context, like, it's amazing that any of the other council members or staff, have energy. But I think the persistence of Palestinian resistance is also just a really incredible story. Like the survival and resistance and persistence of this people over decades and decades and decades of occupation also really shines through in the movie. Like watching kids throw rocks at soldiers who have just been shooting at them with live ammunition, like that happens all the time, right? I mean, there is still this very deep spirit of uprising in Palestine, even after people have been so brutally treated for so long. And I think that's really inspiring also.
Yeah, it was a film that didn't, that wasn't like grief-centric. It was pushback-centric, right? I mean, I felt like it was like, how are we going to sustain a city and also push back? But then I'm hearing you say, Sijal, that there's a way that characters like Mayor Hadid, with the very best of intentions, can really be getting in the way of the future of freedom for all Palestinian people. And I wonder, is there another way? Like, what do you, if you could be political decider for the region, like what could someone who is sitting in his seat as mayor of Ramallah be doing differently?
I'm gonna sound like an uncle right now, or like my dad, and I'm gonna be like, don't capitulate, don't surrender, and the reality that we witness in the movie is basically the aftermath of the little history moment, the Oslo Accords, which is the accords in which basically set up jurisdictions in Palestine and the occupied West Bank as zones A, B, and C. And what we witnessed in the movie was strictly within Zone A, which is a zone that is governed almost in totality, or legally in totality, by the Palestinian Authority. And because of, heavy losses, I'm not going to even say this, I'm going to speak for my people's lineages here, but we've lost so much. Like, I'm not going to, try to rattle that idea, and I don't, and these positions, but these kinds of decisions have been made by certain Palestinian elites for the totality of the Palestinian people, have drastically shaped outcomes. And so a little bit about myself is that, my family in Palestine, they were refugees from 1948 from a village called Ain Suba, which is in Jerusalem, but it is in the displaced part of Jerusalem, where those Palestinians fled to neighboring countries, but also are internally displaced in refugee camps all across the country. And my family lives in an area called Aizarieh, which is in a Zone C area of Palestine, which means there's no municipality, there's no government. It's completely subject to the rule of the occupying powers. If you need to get rid of your trash, you burn it. If you need to access water, you figure it out. Deal with negotiations with the Israeli water company. If you want electricity, you figure it out. It's like a very different lifestyle, and that is the majority of occupied Palestine that wasn't shown in the film. So I think what we see, and I'll say this not to speak from my own perspective, but from history, is in many, from whether it's from apartheid South Africa or in Palestine, we see the rise of the elites, bourgeois class, folks who are also colonized, as being major impediments to the collective liberation of the entire people. And I don't know much about Musa Hadid. I can't say I do, But I know that the broader Palestinian leadership has done some of that, schmoozing that he did in the movie, where he was traveling different places, breaking ground, cutting ribbons, doing kinds of those things, and then felt like that was the path to victory. And I just know deeply, deeply in my heart that it isn't. Not at this point and not in the future. And I'm not going to shame that path because it's not mine. And it's also not my reality, although from a Palestinian refugee family growing up here in North Carolina. But I do know it's not the one that's going to get us what we need. Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to lift up some words he said about we do not want, this was in reference to Vice President Mike Pence's statement about offering protection to the Christians. And he said, we need to make a comeback statement to Mike Pence saying, we don't want protection as Christians. We want protection from the occupation, and we want that protection from the whole world. And I just wonder, if you might be able to just speak to some of the kind of inter-religious solidarities that are being practiced in occupied Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in the short answer of that, I don't think that this has ever been a religious conflict, and many Christian Palestinians and freedom-loving Palestinians, all freedom-loving Palestinians want the world to know that Bethlehem is the birthplace of Jesus Christ, and it's run and occupied and governed and taken care of and well treated by Palestinian people, and has been for a very long time. And so, I guess in my own experience, very often in my own experience, I've never really even knowing Palestinians and loving Palestinians and being in Palestine, religion is never actually on the tip of people's tongues when they're relating to one another.
But it's so often how the lens through which it's delivered by the media to people in the U.S. who are trying to understand what's happening, how can I help? What would you say to those folks who are just beginning to hear about what's happening in Palestine? What is the heart of the matter? Why is this occupation still underway? Why are folks living in the kinds of devastating backdrops that we saw in this film?
It's a hard question.
Can I also pass it to Jillian?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
What's at the heart of the matter?
So I wanted to say really quickly about the film being focused on a Christian community. I think it would be really interesting to talk to the filmmakers about why they made that choice, because I think that there is, at least in U.S. standard, U.S. mainstream media, this association of Palestine with Islam, and that people don't know a lot about Christianity in Palestine. And there are lots of ways to think about why someone might choose to make a film about Palestine, about a Christian community rather than a Muslim community. And I think it would be really, really interesting to hear more about why they made that choice from both an artistic or a political reason. What's the crux of the conflict, right? It's colonization. And I don't think it's really that different from any other kind of colonial conflict. I think that it is in the interest of certain people for the world to believe that it's different, and for the obvious comparisons to places like South Africa to be denied. But I've actually always thought that the situation in Palestine was pretty clearly a colonial occupation. And the resulting, issues that then arise from people dealing with the results of a colonial occupation. I remember there's one scene in the movie where they were talking about Prince William coming to visit, and someone says, well, all of our problems started with Britain. Like when they're trying to decide, I can't tell if they were trying to decide whether to even like take the meeting or if they were just deciding like how to approach it or whatever. But they're like, yeah, all of our problems started with Britain. And I'm like, yeah, they did. This is, the history of Palestine is very much part of that history of, of global colonization by Europe. And then the long-term impacts of that. And I think the situation with Israel is unique in the world for a lot of reasons, that Israel has had so much support from the US as a global power, and has been able to maintain this kind of occupation for much longer than I think countries who did not have that kind of support would be able to. But yeah, in the end, it's a territorial battle. It's a battle over resources. Looking at maps of settlements in the West Bank, you can see very clearly how they've been designed to capture the best land, the best access to water, that they're and just the way that, the current right-wing Israeli government has completely ignored any kind of international law or international standard with regard to expansion of settlements. I think that the situation there is and continues to be this sort of growing now like internal colonization, and the West Bank is just really stuck in between all these different political forces that are keeping people oppressed and keeping people in a situation where they don't have any kind of self-determination. And then trying to run a city in that context is, how do you ever?
And having in that, when that visit happened with Prince William, there was this voice in the background we heard that was like, that whole visit was an ego trip for the municipality. They didn't even show the occupation. And I feel like exposing what the heart of the Israeli occupation is about, the colonialism, the land grab, the power over, and the apartheid. I think calling that out for what it is crucial. And there's like I think you rightly named, Jillian, the kind of confusion about what it's about has allowed the occupation to go longer and get away with more. And has meant that every time someone tries to speak up against occupation, it becomes necessary to also say, we remain in solidarity with Jewish people and oppose anti-Semitism, which, certainly Jewish dignity, challenging the oppression of Jewish people should be a given, right? And the idea that those are somehow like mutually exclusive it's a faulty understanding of what's at hand here. There was this thing that Mayor Hadid said that felt quite inspiring to me, and I wanted to lift it up and kind of like put it in your baloney meter. They're trying. So he gets asked like, what are they doing with these raids where they're trying to like access surveillance footage in Ramallah, and they're like threatening to blow up people's doors and like sitting in people's homes and watching the videos. And he said, they're trying to remind us that we are still under occupation, but we always remember. I want to say to them, the land is ours, the city is ours. All your attempts to control this city will fail. How real is that? Like, when I heard that line, I was like, oh, are you like putting your body between the people of Ramallah and the occupiers? What did you think of that scene where they were basically storming City Hall? Sijal?
Yeah, I mean, I think my baloney meter on 1 to 10, it's actually just a spectrum. It's a baloney spectrum. It's gonna be, I'm like cascading between like the area of a 2 and a 9. And I think that's like, particularly because, again, like, I do believe the contradiction. I do believe the contradiction. And I do believe he's an amazing politician at speaking to the sense of the feeling and sentiments of his people, while at the same time not fully invested, not actually, I would say, not invested in actually creating any sort of like, or taking the kind of risk necessary, I would say that his people would desperately need of what, in an idyllic sense, of formal Palestinian leadership would look like. And I don't know much about his history, but many of the people who are in Palestinian government are actually from the Palestinian Liberation Organization, like liberation movements that then capitulated and then now in the process of state formation, and this is the route they're taking. And so they have these sentiments. This language is part of the way they feel. But for the reason the baloney meter, like, that's the reason baloney meter is maybe at a like 9 or somewhere, and I feel that. And the reason it's at a 2 is because his behavior, and I, this part may not be about Musa. This is just about me as a Palestinian who wants things desperately better for himself and his people. But to see him in the building, shutting the lights off, kind of being there, waiting for things to kind of blow out while there are people in the streets, confronting, videotaping, observing, waiting to kind of drive them out with all their force and put their bodies in danger to do that. And then seeing that, hey, like, want to get some comments, the media wants to get some comments, and he's like, oh no, y'all are the heroes. That's just Arab hospitality. That's like Southern hospitality. No, y'all did all the work. No. You are excited to stand in front of those cameras and tell the story of the moment. And it hurt to watch that. Mm-hmm. So that's, yeah.
Do you want to speak to it, Jillian?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that for sure. I think, just thinking about my role in government and my role in movement, that I have been like that I see as part of my role to be in the streets with Durham residents. And so one of the first kind of like controversial media moments of my electoral politics moment was when I went to a demonstration outside the jail. That was a protest against jail deaths, and I got just a ton of pushback from people who were invested for whatever reason in policing and incarceration, and people telling me this wasn't my place and it wasn't my role and I shouldn't be doing that. At the same time, the stakes are so much higher in that kind of a volatile situation. Like, I can go out in the streets of Durham and be fairly certain I'm not going to get shot. Like, it happens, but it's not something that I'm actively worrying about when I'm out in a demonstration at Durham. Whereas, I mean, these people are opposing a military. It takes so much more courage. And I want someone who is in a position of leadership in this context to have that courage, to be willing to put themselves in the line of fire for their people. And I also recognize just how difficult that is and how big of an asset is. to make of somebody. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Like when he was holed up in that building and people were running around outside, I wanted him to be out there with them. I wanted him to be in the streets with his people. And yeah, I mean, it's a hard space. And I feel like my experience is just so, it's limited by the relative, and again, you know, the United States is not in any way a peaceful country, especially for, you know, low-income people and people of color. And but just by, you know, the contrast between the kind of violence and oppression that people in this country have to deal with versus actually living under military occupation, it's huge. You know, like we can draw comparisons, we can talk about similar experiences, but they're but it really is an extreme difference of degree.
It is definitely an extreme difference of degree, and there are parallels that Black liberationists in the U.S. have drawn to the police as an occupying force in Black communities. And I wondered, Jillian, like, what would you say to those fellow Black liberationists, like, about what one might learn from the Palestinian liberation struggle? Like, you've traveled in Palestine and been so involved with movement work here. Were there lessons you brought home that you're still drawing on?
I think one of the best things about my visit to Palestine was meeting people from all over the world who were part of different anti-colonial and different liberation struggles. So I met people from Basque Country, from Catalonia, from Ireland, from India, who all saw themselves as part of this global global anti-colonial movement, who were coming to Palestine as part of, you know, answering a call for international solidarity by Palestinian communities in the West Bank. But also really to learn from those communities and to bring experiences back to their home countries and to share experiences of living under different kinds of colonization and different kinds of occupation occurring at different points in history, right? There were people who, you know, at the time, I didn't know that that the Catalan region of Spain had an independence movement, that they, you know, that they saw themselves as an occupied people, and that there was this strong movement for independence that was constantly being suppressed by the state. And I learned so much just from all of these people in all these different countries about liberation movements. And we all drew a lot of inspiration from the Palestinians that we were working with. I was there when the Israeli government was building the security wall around Israel, and the village that I was living in was losing a significant portion of its agricultural land that was going to be on the Israeli side of the wall. And these folks were every single Friday having a huge march, put out the call. Internationals, Israeli activists, and Palestinians from, you know, around the West Bank would come, have these huge demonstrations, and it was consistent, persistent resistance every single week, you know, never giving up. I was staying in an apartment that was owned by a family where the father had been arrested months before. They had, I think, 3 or 4 young kids who hadn't seen their dad in, you know, 6-7 months. Just the sacrifices that people were making and were willing to continue making for their people, and for justice were just incredibly inspiring. And I learned a lot from them. And I still do think a lot about my experience there when I, you know, think about movements and, you know, different kinds of work that we're doing in this country, and just how much more militant people are. Like when somebody was about to get arrested by, you know, Israeli Border Patrol, people would physically like go in and separate them from the military. I mean, it was because the consequences were so much higher, right? For a Palestinian to be arrested by the Israeli army was a huge deal. But it was also, there was this fearlessness, you know, where like you would never see that happening in this country. You would never see activists trying to physically drag someone away from the army, you know, or from the police. But people were so much more willing to like risk themselves in the service to the movement. And it was really inspiring, and really I learned a lot, and I think I still carry a lot with me.
Yeah. We have definitely seen loved ones not return from Durham County Jail, but it feels like we will need to take greater risks in service of liberation.
Yeah, no, I mean, we talked about, like, doing trainings, like how can, could people who have been a part of this movement and have been doing this work for so long and have so many skills, like how could they be like trainers or teachers for people from all these other, global resistance movements. And yeah, you're right. The consequences are extremely dire sometimes for people in this country too, but we don't intervene. It's just a very, very different kind of way that resistance happens there.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think there's so much about like resistance culture and music and storytelling and song that I've observed about Palestinian freedom movements that I feel like echo some what really has kept us strong and connected here in the South. I want to lift this question from one of our viewers for you, Sijal. What are connections we could be building between organizing here in Durham and solidarity with Palestine?
I mean, I think about this question a lot, and I have like a personal reaction to it, and I have a more pragmatic political reaction to it. I'll start with the easy one. The easy pragmatic one is like essentially, in many ways, the budget is the key. And so what I mean by that is that there are people who are elected into our office who are congressional representatives who, in many ways, like, state representatives who have access to money, and they use that money to make extremely consequential decisions about our lives. And whether it's the defund the police movement or the BDS movement,
sorry, do you mind defining BDS?
Oh yeah, sorry. Boycott, divestment, sanctions movement against the Israeli apartheid. These movements really need to be able to control budgets, control decision making that is distributing money either to our oppressors, and for Palestinians, those oppressors are the continuation and the growth of the Israeli military, and for many of us in this country on a day-to-day basis, it is police, and the way that policing is murdering our families and murdering our loved ones. And in many ways, I see that as like the most pragmatic approach to understanding the ways in which these struggles are interconnected. And in some interesting ways, you can find really staunch supporters for our movements and causes, both aligning with defund the police and pro-BDS sentiments. And then those are beautiful, beautiful moments, right, that we love. And then there's also sometimes the ones who are most against our liberation, who are the staunchest supporters of the militarization of our lives, both here and in Palestine. And then, my personal approach is that, I see myself here in, North Carolina, and like, growing up in this country, and like that this country was a settler colony of European genocidal colonizers who came and wreaked havoc on those who lived here before us. And the life that we live here is after generations and generations of lost lives and struggle to the kinds of with similar kinds of tactics that we see happening in Palestine. And the difference, I think, and I see between like what you mentioned, Jillian, and I always think this, like, where does this like lack of fear, where does this like passion and ferocity towards like the tenacity to like, I'm gonna pull my friend from the arms of the military, happen there in Palestine with clash of the military, and then here where it's like it doesn't, that's a very different thing, that we don't see it with the same level. And I think a big distinction that a big similarity that I like to point out is that we are living in a settler colony that has been normalized, and deeply normalized beyond sometimes our like daily perceptions. And I just try to remember that on a daily basis when I go out into this world, is that like, you know, very, very similar tactics of limiting, shrinking, re-educating, dispossessing communities, forcing them into surrendering and not following by the same exact environment that, broadly speaking, in Palestine and here. So I do feel like by living in this country and trying to do something, we are actually in solidarity.
That's awesome. Thank you. So if we're thinking about revolutionary struggles and our kind of long freedom struggle having a day-to-day in which we still need to keep the lights on, and would really love if our hardworking sanitation workers were to pick up the trash from the curb. Like, to keep those kinds of things going requires a well-functioning municipality, right? And I'm wondering, Jillian, like, as you kind of straddle these worlds of being like deeply involved in movement work and being deeply involved in making sure the city runs and is in the best possible relationship with the county to best serve the people, like, what would you like to say to your fellow movement folks? And what would you like to say to your fellow hardworking municipal workers? Like, what would you like them to know about those worlds? Yes, baby. Hello. Amandla, do you want to say hi to our folks? Hi, look.
Hi.
It's Auntie Jillian.
Hello.
Hello.
Sijal. Hi.
I know this is not in any way the worst thing about COVID, but the worst thing about COVID is not getting to kiss babies right now. It's the worst. Yeah, I think that there are lots of different ideas of what a municipality should be. What is the goal? What is the role? What is the point? Why do we exist? And there are groups like Barcelona and Comu, for example, that have this these really exciting ideas of like what municipal power could be used for, what it could be, in addition to picking up the trash and making sure the water is clean. How can we actively improve the lives of our residents? And I think that we have tried to do that in different ways in the city of Durham, thinking beyond just municipal services. But I think a lot of that is kind of new. Like cities have done broader sort of quality of life programs, for example, but thinking about whether a city attorney's office could actively work with the court system to help people get their fines and fees waived to get their driver's licenses back. Like, that was a brand new, unique idea that came out of the City of Durham, our innovation team. And it was a way for the city to like use our capacity to advance the civil rights of our residents in a different kind of way than just picking up trash or making sure that they have water. And so I think that there is a space that kind of holds both of those things, that like that part of being a municipal leader is broader and is about community and is about everyone having the best possible life in your municipality. That you can bring people together that the city can be a convener in bringing people together to work together to improve everyone's opportunities, lives, and that we've been able to do some of that. And also, I think sometimes about the city is like a lab for different kinds of like social explorations. So one thing that we've been talking about a lot in Durham and that other cities have done is like experiments with universal basic income. There's a city in California, maybe a few other cities where they've, just done these projects where they've given people, small amounts of money every month to supplement their income, and then, documented the impact of that the city has done that. Personally, I don't think UBI needs any more experiments. I think the data is in, and it's pretty clear that giving people money makes their lives better. I don't know why that was ever confusing. Like, why do we have to study this? But it's an opportunity to use the city as a lab to do those kinds of programs, and to think about ways that a municipal government could be useful in improving the economic conditions of the residents beyond just like, well, there's a downtown and we pave the streets and we make sure the businesses have water. How can we actually improve people's economic conditions as a city? One thing that our race equity task force recently recommended, which is way beyond the scope of anything that the city could do right now, but something that I think is worth thinking about, is a municipal jobs guarantee. And I really like the idea of a federal jobs guarantee. I think that's probably the level at which this is going to happen if we want it to be truly universal. But there's so much work that needs to be done. There's not a lack of work in this community, in this country. So the fact that anyone who wants to work and doesn't have that opportunity, it means that there's a gap. There's like a social hole that we're not filling. And could the municipality be a provider of opportunities to work? And there are tons of infrastructure projects that could happen in the community. There's care work. Our community is getting older, and more people need carers in their homes or in retirement communities. There's just so much that I think we could do if we broaden the idea of what a municipality should be and think about it as a community more than a collection of water and sewage pipes and treatment plants and cars. How do we do bigger?
I feel like what you're saying is so connected to what Sijal just said about not allowing a sort of neutral narrative, not normalizing the occupation, that we can denormalize injustice and politicize the choices of municipalities, right? Understand each decision as one that either kind of reifies the existing power structures or contests them and gets resources to the folks who are being left out and left behind. There's this quote that guides movement work from a book by George Lakey called How We Win, where he says, "And so we won victory after victory by doing something fairly simple, staying on the offensive and being very, very bold about it. Anyone can do it." And it's his pushback when he's talking about how sometimes movements make the mistake of, as soon as they see the opposition pushing back, they feel like they have to focus on defending their victories alone instead of keeping the goals visionary. But this part about being very, very, very bold about it and staying on the offense, it gets complicated when we're movements in conversation with come out of the movement work, right? And I'm wondering, is there a message you would also want to say to your movement colleagues about how to be in co-governance in ways that are like going to maximize the fact that we have worked really hard to get our electeds into office?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. Co-governance is hard. It's always hard. And knowing, now being part of a network of elected officials from all over the country, I get to hear a lot of stories about people trying to do co-governance in different kinds of ways. And there's always, there's always a certain amount of distrust and friction between like establishment and institutions and people who are used to and who are in necessary ways fighting institutions and fighting the establishment, right? And so figuring out how to bring those worlds together is really tricky. And I think also the wins are not always as big as we would like, or there are certain things that are not going to be possible to win within the context of government. Like there are things we can do to make people's lives better. And I think we should do those things. And I think being in this role, like having the power to do those things is worth me being in this role. I don't feel like I'm wasting my time because I can't end capitalism as a member of the Durham City Council, right? I think that there are things that I can do that are worth doing, and I feel good about being able to do them. But I think that there are also these huge expectations sometimes for what people in local government or even state or like one person in Congress should be able to do. And it's just not possible. I can't creatively think my way out of capitalism. I can't care enough my way out of structural racism. These are things that exist outside of my ability, like my role to do work. But I think that it is important for movements to be involved in the work that government does, because it's going to make it better. Even though like there's a ceiling to the liberatory power of a city government, we can approach that ceiling if we're doing the work in cooperation with movement and with people who are excited about getting us there. So we may not be able, I had a funny conversation recently with a council colleague in another city who said that over the last 6 months, they've been working really hard on police reform, and the left thinks that they've done absolutely nothing, and the right thinks that they've completely abolished their police department, and it's just like literal chaos in the streets. And I was like, wow. I think that describes the situation that most of us are in, like most progressive or left movement electeds are in, where we're sort of navigating these situations where there are just fundamentally competing visions of what's happening, and there's not a lot of synergy in the middle. I think people need to have reasonable expectations. Like what the city of Durham can do is limited, but I think we can do the maximum that we can do if we work together. We can move our police resources into unarmed crisis response and unarmed traffic response, and that will save lives. That will absolutely save lives. It will save people going to prison. It will have a huge impact. Will it end the carceral state? Well, no, but you can't end the carceral state from within a local government. That's beyond our capacity, but I think we can do a lot.
It's awesome. Thank you, Jillian. And Sijal, I want to ask sort of like the flip of that question. Like, I really was so moved by what you were saying about the encouragement you would want to give the mayor of Ramallah about hold firm and be unrelenting about our freedom, and wondered, like, to all the elected officials who are listening to this, what would you want to let them know about being accountable to our movements? I'm seeing Mama Candace in the chat saying it actually is about babies. Everything we do is about the present and a future for the babies and their babies and their babies. And I know that's so salient for you as a new parent. What would you say to the electeds who are tuning in for this conversation about being accountable to that future?
You know, there's like a baby crying in my distance too, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around this at the same time. I'm trying to like position myself within like how I felt watching this, and like having spent many years going to Palestine, being with my family there. I've been to that city hall. I've been to that fountain, that end of the movie. I'm trying to like place myself there and just try to think on this. And I just feel like I would just love I think embodied like struggle in our successes and failures. I think that in where our shortcomings are, and authenticity in all of that, like where our challenges are and all these things. I mean, that's just kind of what I'm leaving, whether it's observing this movie or trying to like understand who the people are that represent me at any level of government in this country, is like a sense of like, you're a person, not a brand. And that really matters. And maybe I'm breaking up actually.
You sound good, and that seems like a useful reminder about tuning into your humanity when you're being asked to make a political decision that impacts a lot of folks. We heard you loud and clear. You sound good, Sijal. Thank you. Any closing words from you, Jillian? Any closing words from you, Sijal?
I just really appreciate the opportunity to experience this film and to have this conversation with y'all. It was really interesting for me to view the work of local governance in this completely different context, in this far more difficult context, but also very, very similar, to my own, just the basic day-to-day work of making, of making a city run, and of trying to do the best you can for people who are experiencing, very difficult times, especially right now with, a global pandemic and the biggest economic crisis in a century. People all over, in Durham and all over the country and all over the world are struggling. And as a city leader, we are often in the position of trying to fix things that we don't really have the resources to fix, that we don't have the authority to fix. And so I really felt his struggle when he was walking around, like looking at sewage. I'm like, dude, where's your staff? And it just felt like a really real film. And I appreciated the way that the everyday tasks and work were juxtaposed against this, juxtaposed against this incredibly difficult context of occupation. And I really related a lot to the people in the movie. And it was really exciting to get to see something about Palestine. I feel like in the couple of years after I visited, I felt really connected to movement work that was focused on Palestine and the Middle East and the occupation. But over time, that my focus and engagement with that work has lessened over time. And so it was really great to be able to come back to that a little bit and think about the occupation and the situation in Palestine, and hear directly from people there about their lives and the work that they're doing and their liberation struggle.
Thanks so much, Jillian. Sijal.
No, I just appreciate this conversation. I thought it was super to have this conversation with y'all. Manju, you just brought such great questions and, guiding posts throughout this. And I just appreciate Palestine, talking about Palestine and not having to, explain why Palestinians deserve better. And this is just, from that place, this has felt just like a really great conversation. So thanks, y'all, for everything.
Thank you. And thanks so much to North Star. And thanks so much to David, Osit, and Mayor, and to Naomi, to Heather. Grateful for all of y'all.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night, friends.